Okay, so this is our first video in the conditional reasoning lesson, and in this video I'm just going to give you the essentials, the fundamental information about conditional reasoning. Okay, so let's take a look at this sentence. It says, if Jane lives in New York City, then she lives in the US. Okay, so this is an example of a conditional statement. But what exactly is it? Well, conditional reasoning deals with conditional statements. Like I said, this is a conditional statement. And a conditional statement is a statement that presents a relationship between two different things. Now, those two different things are called conditions, and they're usually found with the conditional indicators if and then. Now, this is also really important. The conditional statement is a hypothetical. It doesn't describe a specific scenario. Neither of the two conditions actually has to be true. So this statement is a classic example of a conditional statement. The two things that the conditional statement is talking about are living in New York and living in the US. Now notice that the statement doesn't say anything about whether or not Jane actually lives in New York or whether she actually lives in the US. Okay, and I mentioned that conditional statements present a relationship between two different things. But what's the relationship? Well, the relationship is very simple. All it is that whenever the first condition is true, the second has to be true as well. You can't have the first thing without the second. And by true, I just mean if there's a specific instance of it. So for example, what this statement tells us is that there's no way for Jane to live in New York City and not live in the United States. If Jane's in New York, then she has to be in the US as well. And once again, that doesn't mean that Jane does live in New York City, but if she did, it would also have to be true that she lives in the US. So, supposing someone told you that Jane lives in New York City, which means that you know that the first condition is true, since there's a specific instance, Jane lives in New York City, then you would automatically know that the second condition is true as well, that she lives in the US. You wouldn't have to look to check if she actually does live in the US, because that will be true by virtue of the meaning of the conditional relationship. So remember, the relationship is whenever the first condition is true, the second has to be true as well. So let's take a look at this conditional statement as well. It says, if you start exercising, then you'll lose weight. Now what this means, once again, is that the statement basically tells us that there's no way for someone to start exercising, the first condition, and not lose weight, the second condition. So if you know that your friend Johnny started exercising, which is a specific instance of the first condition, then you know without checking Johnny's weight that he lost weight, because that has to be true. In the previous example about living in New York and living in the US, there was no way that we could even come up with a situation where someone lived in New York and didn't live in the US. But here it's certainly possible that someone started exercising but didn't lose weight. Maybe they started eating more and the exercise didn't help. Maybe they didn't do the right kind of exercises, etc., etc. But on the LSAT, you don't have to worry about any of that stuff. If you're given a conditional statement, just assume that the relationship is true and that no matter what the statement is talking about, you're never going to have a situation where the first condition is true and the second condition is not true. Okay, so that's how I want you to understand these statements. In addition to that, it's also really helpful to diagram conditional statements. And the way you would do that is like this. You would symbolize the first condition. In this case, we'll just put exercise as a symbol for if you start exercising. Then you would draw an arrow to the right of that, and you would draw a symbol, you would draw some sort of representation for the second condition. In this case, we'll just put weight loss for then you'll lose weight. And the arrow lets us know that to the left of it is the first condition, and to the right of it is the second condition. And the way you would read this is if exercise, then weight loss. Diagramming the statements makes them easier to work with when you're doing the questions and the test. So like I said, first symbolize the if conditional, then an arrow pointing to the right, and finally a symbol for the then conditional. And just use symbols that make sense to you. Abbreviations or first letters generally work fine. So to recap, conditional logic deals with conditional statements. Statements that describe a relationship between at least two elements, also known as conditions. Elements are also known as conditions. And a conditional relationship is defined is one where an if condition can't be true without the then condition being true as well. And thirdly, a conditional statement doesn't say that anything is actually true. It's just a hypothetical.